My Lords, I want to also congratulate my noble friend Lord Clement Jones for introducing this important bill, which of course I support. And I declare an interest as someone who started off at the age of 12 singing live music with a small band in small venues. My Lords, nowadays, if you were to ask a child or a young person about what type of music they like, the vast majority would answer with a list of the most current pop singers and groups. If you asked them where they sourced their music, they would more than likely answer that they downloaded it from the internet onto their computer or their MP3 player. This clearly demonstrates that young people usually access music at arm's length, in a sort of detached way. Many of today's most popular performances are acts and groups made famous by television talent shows, but for me, one of the most worrying aspects of these performances is the absence of performing musicians in vision. In the vast majority of cases, the audience is treated to a dazzling display of dancing, lighting effects and highly produced soundtracks, but nowhere to be seen are the musicians who make the music which backs the singer or the group. It's as if the music just magically plays as a backing track behind the performers. We rarely see musicians playing their instruments. My Lords, my concern is that many youngsters are growing up never seeing or enjoying the performances of talented musicians. As the daughter of a jazz saxophonist and a singer myself, I find it both sad and disturbing that many of the nation's children believe that music which backs their singing idols is produced electronically in a distant studio and played as a backing track. I went to a concert recently at which some of today's biggest stars and pop groups and boy bands were performing, and I saw not one real musician playing on stage. They all used backing tracks. But in contrast, last year I hosted a concert at the Royal Festival Hall where children and young people performed live music, some as young as 7. The performers included Sir Hannah Grego's 51st State Band, 100 young musicians who played saxophones, flutes, trombones, trumpets, as well as percussion and guitar instruments. Many of the performers were from disadvantaged backgrounds who might otherwise have found themselves drawn to gangs and street crime if it were not for the opportunity to learn an instrument and to play in a band. It gave them the great opportunity to focus on something positive. It taught them to be disciplined, to show consideration to others. It built self-esteem and confidence, as well as helped them to be creative and to use their imagination. However, my concern for them is that if they do decide to branch out and form a small group in the hope of being discovered, the places and the opportunities for them to perform are limited because of the existing live music legislation. As a teenager in the 60s, I grew up performing with my father's jazz band in pubs, at weddings and parties, at town halls, at private functions all over London and beyond. We even performed in a prison once, which was quite an experience. But in those days, there was no restrictions on what we did or where we could perform. Of course, our instruments were unamplified, which caused little nuisance. Mind you, we did once experience some restrictions when we arrived at a gig at an Irish-run pub on St. Patrick's Day. The landlord asked if we played Irish music. My father replied, "No, we play jazz." To which the landlord said, "Well, you better leave quickly before the customers hear you." My Lords, with the progress and growth in the popularity of pop music and the introduction of amplifiers, it became less acceptable to allow a free-for-all in the performance of live music in venues without stringent licensing controls and legislation. Obviously, today's audience can go in their thousands to see live music at expensive music festivals at large venues up and down the country. However, my lords, I believe that the 2003 Licensing Act went too far and had a negative effect on the performance of live music in small venues, especially by small groups playing unamplified music. My biggest concern is the shift away from live music performances in these types of venues and the lack of opportunity young people have to see grassroots musicians playing in cafes, bars, restaurants and other local venues and having the joy of listening to a live guitarist playing or a jazz trio playing in the corner of their local pub is awful. I believe that the Act, as it is, stifles the opportunity for audiences and aspiring musicians to get together and enjoy and revel in the performance of live music. Music which brings joy and happiness to the human soul and feeds the soul, feeds the human spirit in these difficult and unhappy times. The power of music stimulates the brains. It doesn't just help us to feel better, but it assists us in our thinking, in our emotions. So I wholeheartedly support my noble friend and say, let us amend this bill and allow more freedom for musicians and venues to provide live music to create a much needed feeling of well-being. Because as I said, music is food for the soul.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.